Guys, and welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident podcast. Today we have a special guest, Athea Levi from the Forefront Radio. We are going to have a book discussion on the book titled Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome.
Justice for you and me. Justice for Mike Brown.
No justice, no peace.
After the death that shook the entire country, I decided to step up as a community activist and create a global podcast, Woke by Accident. Here, I amplify compelling news stories and matters impacting African Americans and their communities. My goal is to give a voice to the voiceless and have the difficult conversations needed to advance relations and matters of race. Tune in to Woke by Accident podcast. I am your host, Jen, and it is streaming on all of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our website, www.wokebyaccident.net. Thank you for listening and take care. Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Woke by Accident podcast. Today we have a special guest, Levi from the Forefront Radio. Welcome, Levi.
Shalom, peace and blessings. Thank you for having me on the show as usual. A pleasure to be here with you.
Definitely. Good to have Levi to join me in a book discussion episode. I will be talking about Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. So, let's see. So we'll start with a definition of post-traumatic slave syndrome. So this term was coined by the internationally renowned researcher, Dr. Joy DeGruy, and this is to describe the multi-generational trauma and injustices experienced by African Americans. And this syndrome covers everything from the dawn of slavery to the recent deaths of Black citizens at the hand of police. So many different ways that this syndrome shows up, actually. And it's come up in a lot of recent conversations. And so I wanted to dig into this. And I know that Levi had this book, and we've had a conversation about it before. So I figured that would be a good person to partake. So I appreciate you being game to discuss the book with us for the viewers today. And let's see. So, post-traumatic slave syndrome is clearly a take on post-traumatic stress disorder. And some of these characteristics include avoiding certain places, people, or activities that may remind an individual of trauma or an experience, difficulty concentrating, feeling jumpy, or being easily angered, appearing emotionally numb, which is also called vacant esteem. And this includes feelings of hopelessness, depression, and a general self-destructive outlook. I have an example, but I want to kind of park it there and go back to Levi to talk about that vacant esteem and those different characteristics of the post-traumatic slave syndrome, which pulls from post-traumatic stress disorder.
This is a phenomenal book. When you read it and you look at it with spiritual eyes, you can correlate it with many things impacting our people. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, for those that are not familiar with it, it is definitely a book by Dr. Joy DeGruy, and it kind of plays on the term PTSS that many people are already familiar with, or PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, where you have an extreme event that occurs that impacts the person for the rest of their lives. And this can be from just one event that transpired. The difference, though, with so-called African Americans, African diaspora, and African Latino is that we as a nation of people, as a collective, have stressors and trauma that have occurred over a long extended period of time. So this impacts us mentally, This impacts us physically, it even impacts us spiritually. I want to read something on the back of the book that kind of touches on it. Post traumatic slave syndrome, the subtitle is America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. It says on the back of the book, in the 16th century, the beginning of African enslavement in the Americas until the ratification of the 13th Amendment and emancipation in 1865, quote, Africans were hunted like animals, captured, sold, tortured, and I don't know if you can use that word on YouTube nowadays, graped. Let's put it like that. There we go. They experienced the worst kind of physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual abuse. Think about it. Not only were we impacted physically, emotionally, in the psychology that's going into your mind, and also spiritual. The key factor of what impacted us was spiritual, meaning what? They removed us from our own spirituality, which is an African Hebraic perspective, to now viewing our oppressor from a religious viewpoint as someone to be revered and worshiped, right? So
Mm-hmm.
then she says, given such history, isn't it likely that many of the enslaved were severely traumatized? And did the trauma and the effects of such horrific abuse end with the abolition of slavery? So you mentioned vacant esteem. So let's touch on the definition of vacant esteem. And it's a really good thing to look at because you've heard of the term self-esteem, low self-esteem, right?
Right.
So what exactly is vacant esteem? This is when someone not only has low self-esteem within themselves, right, but instead of having just low self-esteem, it's almost absent, like
Mm-hmm.
non-existent, not there, no, like a feeling of no self-worth at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what you would look at when it comes to thinking about vacant esteem. Okay. In the article that you provided me with that talks about what is post-traumatic slave syndrome, she touches on this, and I'll briefly read this article. It says, the recent civil unrest in response to ongoing racial injustice in the United States highlights the entrenched trauma that African Americans have experienced and carried across generations. We are especially reminded of this during the month of June, which marks the anniversary of Juneteenth and the massacre of Black Wall Street. So, now before I continue, she mentioned this in her book as far as like trauma and its effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, when you read page 97, right, she says, what are the impacts of generations of slavery and oppression on a people? That is a very important question to ask. Because when you think of trauma, right, you only think of just like one incident that can occur that may affect someone where they have negative results of that, whether
Right.
it's behavioral disorders, a lack of sleep, stuff like that. But think about this happening over generations of time. Not only you, but your parents, your foreparents, your grandparents before that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she asked that question. What are the impacts of generations of slavery and oppression on the people? In order to begin to understand the magnitude of this legacy on contemporary African Americans, it is important to examine the diagnostic characteristics of trauma. So, what she's doing now is she's breaking down and saying we have to look at it bit by bit and analyze this,
Mm-hmm.
right? What are the effects of trauma on human beings? What does trauma look like and how does it manifest itself? So, then she gives an example. She says, if you shoot someone, pretend that the attendee is at a lecture, right? And most would agree that the victim of the shooting itself would be severely traumatized. Noted. Okay. So then it says a gentleman seated a few rows away from the victim might be somewhat less traumatized. Someone walking in the middle of the hallway who heard the gunshot could be possibly traumatized. Some family members of the victim, informed about the shooting, may be intensely traumatized, while others very little. So, what she's doing here is she's giving an example of one incident that occurred and the spiral effect of how it impacts others in that vicinity of that individual. Some are
Mhm.
impacted and some are not, right? Then it says, this is because human beings have a variant way or react differently to events and to trauma. So now she gives another example. She says, with the destruction of the World Trade Center in September 11th of 2001, many Americans became familiar with the term post traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Many citizens were reporting to be suffering from this disorder as a result of witnessing the destruction of those buildings and the plight of those trapped inside. So I remember where I was in quote unquote 9/11, right?
Right.
And I was in high school at the time. And I remember, Jen, that I was like watching it on TV and I was like looking around at all the different classmates, my teacher, everyone looked sad, distraught. It even had me teary-eyed. I was like, dang, this
Right.
is a messed up situation. It's really bad. So in that one instant, right, America always says, oh, never forget that instance, right? But there were things that impacted Black people that were way worse, way worse than 9/11.
Okay.
So she gives that example of 9/11 so we could collectively look at a period of time where people were impacted by trauma. So now consider this. Going back to the article now. It says the massacre of Black Wall Street. So now this, Jen, is the first of many recorded in history of domestic terrorism happening to the citizens of the United States, right? It
Yes.
says the massacre of Black Wall Street was another historic event that caused enduring damage, both economically and psychologically. For the African American community, it remains one of the deadliest recorded acts of racial aggression in U.S. history. And believe it or not, many Americans don't even know about this. They
Right.
don't
It's not
even
really
know about
taught in school. Right.
it.
Hmm.
It's not taught in schools. If you didn't have a YouTube or someone that was familiar with the story to share it with you, you wouldn't know that the United States actually created of themselves an act of domestic terrorism against its own citizens. So on June 1st of 1921, white residents of Tulsa, Oklahoma, ignited 2 days of unparalleled racial violence against the town's prosperous African American community. Following this accusation that allegedly a black man attempted to get with a white woman. Come on now. Come on now.
Hmm.
Flabby Patty,
Hmm.
Krabby Patty. Come on now. This is the same excuse that they utilize to destroy hundreds of thousands of people's lives. So the entire community was set on fire, leading to 300 deaths and 800 injuries, and thousands left homeless. Okay, so now I have a Bible verse real quick that I
Hmm.
want to read. So consider that everything that we go through, there's, of course, a spiritual effect about it, right? I talked before on previous episodes about like generational curses and how that impacts us as a nation of people and how we could break these generational curses. I'm going to read the characteristics of how white survivalists that suffer from the white inferiority complex, how they impact us in the United States and globally. So think about this scripture. This is the book of Micah, chapter 2. We're going to read verse 1 and verse 2. It says, woe to them. The word woe means destruction. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil on their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand. So God is giving us a descriptive thought of how we could look at the mindset of those that are oppressors. He says, woe to them that devise iniquity, meaning they plot within their mindset a device to cause lawlessness, immoral behavior, an immoral act, like what we read about Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was an immoral
Mm-hmm.
act, right? Then it says, and work evil upon their beds, meaning while they're sleeping, they're thinking about how can we negatively affect so-called blacks, so-called Hispanics, so-called Native Americans. This is the thought process of an oppressor. It says, when the morning is light, they practice it. So they were laying in their bed at night thinking, I have an idea. Let me send a Karen to go out into the world, falsely accuse a black man of looking at her, quote unquote, looking, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
create a situation and an incident where we can start killing people. This is the mindset of an oppressor. So it says when the morning is light, meaning when they wake up, they practice it because it is in the power of their hand. Meaning what? The United States of America has the military strength to attack people with their armies, their national guards, their navies, their air forces, their domestic soldiers called police, right? That stress that impact us through negative policies, right? It says because it is in the power of the hand. So now listen to this part close, because this is exactly America to the T. Watch this. Verse 2. And they covet fields. So they take fields, they take land, they take property, right? By violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man. Listen to the words. So they oppress a man and
Mm-hmm.
his house, even a man and his heritage. So what does that mean? They create vacant esteem within all races of men by coveting fields, stealing land, stealing property, by violence, by violence. When the United States came over here, there was black folks already here.
Right.
Those people that they call Native American Indians, many of them came from the continent of Africa. They are the descendants of ancient Israelites as well as some Hamitic tribes. They intermingled with other populations of people, which is why you have mixtures and variations of native tribes. So they covered fields. They stole the land, right? Called it after their own name. We're going to call this Columbia based on Christopher Columbus. We're going to call this Washington based on Washington. So they covered fields and take them by violence. They didn't vote for this place.
Right.
They didn't say, hey, you know what? Let's get the Senate together. You know, y'all black and brown people, come on over here. Let's hang out. Let's kind of vote a little bit for this. No, they took it by violence. The Bible got their card to a T,
Mm-hmm.
and houses and take them away. So now this is your property, right? You're in a house, you own the house. Here comes somebody knocking on your door with guns, with a machete, all this stuff, right? They kick you out the house and say, you know what, you can have this little reservation, this reserved area right here. You can sleep in the bathroom. Here you go, sleep in the bathroom, and we'll have the whole house. And you know what? Matter of fact, instead of you having a whole house, we're gonna call our name after this house, and we're gonna call ourselves you. That's what happened to black people. That's what happened to Mexicans. That's what happened to Native Americans, right? This is why you
Mm-hmm.
got movies like The Last Mexican, played by a white dude, Last of the Mohicans, played by a white dude, The Last Samurai, played by a white dude. You
Mm-hmm.
understand what I'm saying? The Bible is
Right.
saying they oppress a man and his house, and not only that, they take their heritage. What is that? Your cultural identity. Think about this for a second. The reason why we have vacant esteem, why we're emotionally numb,
Mhm.
why we have feelings of hopelessness, why we suffer depression, why we have a destructive outlook on our life is because we don't know who we are. We don't know that we are the descendants of the ancient Israelites. Why? Because those that oppressed us took our heritage. They took our records, they read the Bible, and it was like, oh, it mentions Ethiopia. Don't tell the black people about that. Oh, it mentions Egypt. Don't tell the black people about that. Oh, it says that Moses was black. A miracle happened where his hand turned from black to white. Don't tell them about that. Oh, Jesus left and lived in Egypt for a while. Don't tell them about that. Job 30:30 says, my skin is black upon me. Don't tell them black folks about that. We don't have an image or a heritage to look upon and say, oh, we weren't just quote unquote Africans swinging off of trees in Africa, but we actually had a racial origin, a racial story, which is known as the Black History Book of the Bible, which many black people don't read. So that's an example of vacant esteem.
Mhm.
Vacant esteem is when you don't have an image, you're emotionally numb, you have feelings of hopelessness because you don't have a culture, a heritage, an identity to look back upon. Okay. I know I was a little bit elaborate in the story, but I wanted to
No, that's good. That's
build
good.
to it.
Definitely. I wanted to share an example that the author shared, and she gave a audio presentation that we actually got to take part in, and so perhaps we can incorporate some of that into the audio version, perhaps just so that that can be shared. But there was an example that I wanted to share. So the author gives a comparison of a white mother and a black mother discussing their sons with one another. The white mother brags on her son, compares him to his father, and basically displaying that she's very proud of her son. Okay, this is a white mother expressing these particular feelings to the other black mother. The black mother, while also proud of her son, highlights his faults in the conversation. So, for example, she says that he's a handful or he's a mess at home. So, the deeper meaning of this explanation is that the Black mother is diminishing the value of her child to the white mother in an effect or an effort of protecting them, similar to what a mother would have done during slavery. Okay. And then back then, if whites thought a slave had a defect or would be a problem, they may be less likely to separate them for the family. And so, in the Black person's mind, they're thinking they're protecting their child, while really they're kind of invoking these feelings of inadequacy, by doing this. And so this is another example of how the post traumatic slave syndrome um, shows up. Another one is an example of the white mother and the black mother in their interactions with their children in public. So she talks about the white children are allowed to explore around in the store with their parent nearby, but not necessarily right at their side. But the black mother will insist that the children be right at their side, not roam around. And the deeper explanation is that the children can safely run around um, and play, but the black children cannot, because it's not okay for you to do that. It's teaching black children that this world does not belong to you, it belongs to whites. They can explore. They are the ones that can venture out. And I mean, take that what you will, but I mean, it's related. It really is. So I thought that was an interesting example of the interactions that we have. Um, and I know I have my own examples from growing up, and I can see where, maybe my parents or aunts or something may have been affected by that, just based on the experiences that they had coming up during Jim Crow era and, segregation and things like that, because it's kind of like a protection mode, even though it may hurt feelings and things like that, but they were like in survival mode. You know what I mean? What do you think about that?
I think that's very true. We have
Mhm.
hundreds and thousands of accounts of how slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, mental abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse from the people that suffer from white inferiority complex, how they impact us. I can relate to that in a story that someone shared with me where this person had a relative who was their grandfather that literally witnessed his brother being lynched. And he hid in the bushes and was watching as his brother was being lynched. And he knew as he was looking at his brother's body being used and abused by individuals that if he left from that area where he was hiding, that he would lose his life as well. How
Right.
did that trauma impact him? He stopped talking to the pasty mayonnaise people for the rest of his life. He didn't deal with them at all.
Mhm. Okay.
At all. Why? Because he recognized unequivocally that he had an enemy, and that enemy had no interests of love, of care, of equality, or any type of humanity within them to see how they can help this individual to survive such an event. Because I never say that all people are bad, but I
Right.
can say you witness evil transpiring and you don't make an effort to stop it. This is the problem that I have with your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. They'll have their own friend do evil in front of their face, and they'll either
Mhm.
cheer him on or they'll say, "Well, that ain't got nothing to do with me," until it hits their
Mhm.
doorstep. So
Okay.
I wanted to touch on something you just mentioned, though.
Hmm.
You just mentioned about how our relatives put into our minds that kind of vacant esteem because we feel like the so-called Caucasian people that they're supposed to run everything. That watch this. I'm gonna show you out of the Bible that we were made to rule the world. The world was actually made for us, God's chosen people. Okay, watch this. In Second Esdras chapter, this is kind of one of the solutions, but I'm not even going to mention it as a solution. I'm going to mention it as just like something to look at to help alleviate that kind of mindset of, oh, everything's supposed to belong to other nations instead of us. Watch this. Second Ezra chapter 6, verse 54, it says, "And after these, Adam also, whom thou madest Lord of all thy creatures, of him come we all, and the people also whom thou hast chosen." So everybody will say, yeah, everybody comes from Adam and Eve. This is where we get all the nations of earth. But then it says, and the people also whom thou hast chosen. So when you read the Bible, you find out in Isaiah 44, verse 1, that the people that were chosen by the Most High God are the people that were called the so called Israelites. Isaiah 44, verse 1, it says, "Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen." So God Himself said, hey, these blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans that you think don't have a culture, they're actually God's chosen people. And I chose them specifically to be the best nation above all nations that's on the earth. We're the best at singing. We're the best at dancing. We're the best at sports. We're the best at science and technology. If they remove the shackles of preventing us of getting into various sectors, we would rule the entire planet. Watch this. Going back to Second Ezra chapter 6. And this is amazing because you could correlate all of this stuff that we're talking about with the Bible. Watch this. Verse 55, it says, "All this have I spoken before thee, O Lord, because thou madest the world for our sakes." Wait a minute, wait a minute. In the Bible, God Himself says He made the world for you. He made the world for us. He didn't make it for those that create wickedness, that create acts of xenophobia, acts of ethnic cleansing. No, He made the world for our sake. So now watch this. As for the other people, which also come from Adam, right? Because there's more people that's on the planet. As for the other
Mhm.
people, listen close. Thou has said that they are nothing. Hold on, wait a minute.
Hmm.
But be like unto spittle. So he said, not only are they nothing, right? They put in their minds, right, that when they enslaved us as a nation of people, that we were nothing and they were something great. But when you ask
Right.
them, tell me some history before the Greeks and the Romans. Oh, they have no history before that because they
Hmm.
were crawling out of the caves. They were picking lice out of their hair and out of the crack of their behind. We're the ones that taught them how to bathe. We're the ones that taught them algebra. We're the ones that taught them science and culture and music and art and vast amounts of libraries that we had. We had libraries in Alexandria. That's in Egypt, y'all. We had churches already set up with a black Jesus, a black God, black angels, black saints,
Hmm.
and they came in and tried to manipulate us, enslave us, and say that we were nothing. No, the reverse. God says, let's read it again. As for the other people, which also come of Adam, thou hast said that they are nothing, but be like unto spittle, and has likened the abundance of them unto a drop that falleth from a vessel. So now think about this. If I have a cup of milk, right? You know how they make that phrase, Jen, don't cry over spilled milk? If
Okay.
I have a cup of milk, right? And I'm running across the field and one little drop of milk falls on the floor. Are you going to cry over that milk? Not really.
No.
You're gonna be
Right.
like, it's just a drop of milk. Who cares about it? That's the same comparison that the Most High says. He says, all these nations collectively outside of us as a nation of people, he says, he likens the abundance of them like a drop that falls from a vessel, like a drop of milk that falls from a cup. We don't cry over spilt milk, right? So then it says, and now, O Lord, behold, these heathen, which means these other nations, which have ever been reputed as nothing, meaning the so called Caucasian, his reputation to God was nothing. The so called Chinese, his reputation to God was nothing. These other nations, in the eyes of God, they're like a drop in a vessel, right? It says, these other nations, these heathen, which have ever been reputed as nothing, have become to be lords over us and to devour us. So what Ezra is doing is he's giving us history now and saying, look, these Babylonians, these Medes and Persians, these Greeks, these Romans, these Europeans, these white Americans, they had a reputation of being nothing. But because we sinned against God, now they have become lords over us. This is what we can go into when it comes to post traumatic slave syndrome. We think in our eyes that we are nothing, that we're less than, that they can esteem. But in reality, we're God's chosen people. We're the ones that have to return to who we truly are. To remove that white inferiority slash superiority thing that's going on in the earth, that's non-existent. That's non-existent. When you make a comparative analysis between how we conduct ourselves as opposed to other nations of people, we would dominate. If they remove all the restrictions, all the repression, all the mental blocks, and we were put back in our rightful place, we would rule this earth as gods and as priests and kings of this earth. All right. I just want to get that little motivation real quick. Your mic is muted. Sorry.
Oh, for sure. And so that's something that we can look to as solutions to this. She mentions, we must return and claim our past in order to move toward our future. It is in understanding who we were that
Mhm.
will free us to embrace who we are now. So, I mean, it definitely speaks to what you shared there.
I want to touch on just briefly
Mhm.
within this book, page 98 and 99. She touches on the diagnostic criteria for post traumatic stress disorder and how it relates to us as a nation of people when it comes to post traumatic slave syndrome, right?
Okay.
So, this is page 98. It says, it is important to note that the manual states, and this is the manual going into post traumatic stress disorder. It says that any one of the above stressors is enough to cause PTSD. So, what is that going into? That's going into people that are exposed to death, people that are threatened with death, people that actually or are threatened with serious injury, people that are affected by sexual violence.
Mhm.
And this includes number one, either direct exposure, witnessing in person, or indirect exposure. Repeated or extreme indirect exposure or adversive details of the event, usually through professional duties such as first responders, collecting body parts, professional repeated exposure to child abuse, stuff like that, right?
Right.
Viewing these things indirectly through electronic media, television, movies, pictures, etc. Think about all the time when a black person is shot by the cops, right? They will go out of their way to show that child, that person, that human being, that adult impacted. Remember what happened to Mike Brown?
Yeah.
Where he got shot and they left his body on the street for 4 hours. That
Yes.
right there is an example of the direct stressors. So imagine you're a 17-year-old kid, right? And you hear a story about Mike Brown, young man, minding his own business, gets somehow involved with some situation and they shoot him. But instead of addressing him and trying to help him, they leave him on the street for 4 hours for the world to see, right? That stress will cause some sort of trauma to that 17-year-old that observed that. With no therapy, no one's coming to say, hey, baby, it's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. We're going to handle this. We're going to go and handle those clowns that did that. No, there's no retribution, no judgment, no nothing, right? So
Right.
she's given that type of external factor that we could look at, right? It says it is important to note that the manual states that one of the above stressors is enough to cause PTSD. So then she asked the question now. So what about so-called enslaved Africans? So what about us? So if that one event could impact so much like thousands of people, what about those that were affected by centuries of slavery, genocide, Jim Crow, all of these things?
Yes.
Many did not experience directly one of those stressors, meaning we weren't directly on slave ships, we weren't directly the ones with chains on our neck, but we have a social memory that we could go back to look at and say, hey, one of our I could look at a relative and say, yes, I know that my relatives were impacted in the Haitian Revolution, my relatives were enslaved by the French. I could go back and look at that. You could look at for your situation who enslaved your ancestors by your same last name, right? So it says so what about enslaved Africans? Many did not experience just one of the above stressors, rather, many experienced all of them. So not only did we have direct exposure to the event, we have witnesses, we have relatives right now that are witnesses to these various events that happen to us, that's seen Jim Crow, that's seen the civil rights era, that's seen, people getting dogs sicked on them and all of that stuff. Right? We've seen those things, and we have living relatives right now, whether aunts, uncles, moms, cousins, nephews, nieces, uncles, whatever, that have experienced these things over and over again. So then she says, taking into consideration the fact that those brought to the Americas from Africa were exposed to a lifetime of traumas, even given the fact that not everyone is traumatized by the traumatic events. Anyone with limited astuteness, meaning if you got common sense, could surmise that a considerable number of African slaves are likely to have suffered from PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
In present day, those who are diagnosed with PTSD exhibit symptoms that may require clinical treatment, inclusive of drug therapy. Some of the symptoms of PTSD include, so now we're going to read some of the symptoms of PTSD. Ask yourself a question as a listener. Do you or anyone you know of suffers from any of these symptoms? Watch this. Recurrent or involuntary or intrusive memories. Have you remembered a memory within your current lifetime where you were impacted by racism and white inferiority complex? I can give you an example of a memory within myself. I remember when I was in the ninth grade, I was living in North Carolina at the time at an
Mm-hmm.
apartment complex. And I was walking up to the Circle K from my apartment complex, going to get some food. Okay. So while I'm going to the Circle K, I get pulled over while walking. You ever heard of driving while black? This is walking while black. A 14-year-old kid walking down the street to go get some snacks. I probably got like maybe $5 in my pocket, right? So I get pulled over while walking. Police officer says to me immediately, "Hey, we heard that there's a robbery in the area, so we're checking. Hey, what's going on?" He didn't say, "Hey, young man, how you doing? Are you doing okay? Are you safe? What you up to?" There was no type of conversation of anything requiring my safety. He literally was like, "Here's a Negro. A robbery happened. Let's find out if he's involved."
Right.
That's traumatic for a 14-year-old child.
It is.
I'm automatically accused without me doing anything, right? So he's like, "Oh, we hear it. There's a robbery in the area, so we want to know what's going on." I immediately pulled the age card. I said, "Look, man, I'm a minor. I'm 14 years old. Any question that you have for me, you can ask my mother." And they were like, "Oh, we got a smart one here." So then I told him, I said, "Hey, do you see me with a TV on my back?" "Oh, we got a smart Negro here." I hear him muttering in his breath to his partner, "We got a smart one over here." So
Mm.
then they finally realize this kid, he's just a kid. He's going to the store, whatever. So they drive out about their business. So even now, being close to my 40s, I have an active memory that I can look at that's a recurrent thought in my mind that was involuntary and intrusive, right? So that's an
Right.
example. That's a symptom of this, right? Here's another symptom: traumatic nightmares. Do you know of, or any relative, or have you experienced out of nowhere, you'll wake up from a really bad dream and not know what the dream is about, but it somehow had some sort of racial motivation behind it? You're either getting chased by somebody, or you're falling, or somebody's trying to attack you. Collectively, you're remembering your ancestors being chased by lynch mobs, being thrown down pits and cliffs, being attacked by alligators. All these different things are collective memories that are ingrained in us that we don't even know of. So that's another example. Here's another one. It says dissociative reactions, meaning flashbacks, which may occur on a continual form from brief episodes to complete loss of consciousness. Intense or prolonged distress after exposure of traumatic reminders. People call it nowadays triggers. You ever heard that term before? Or "this person's triggering me."
Yes. That's yes, very common.
That's very common. So think about it. Black people get triggered easily. "Oh, you remind me of this situation that happened between such and such and such." That's what she's talking about here. Then it says trauma related thoughts or feelings, trauma related external reminders such as people, places, conversations, activities, objects, or situations, negative alterations in cognitive or cognitions and mood that became a worsened after the traumatic event. Here's another example: inability to recall key factors of the traumatic effect, meaning people have disassociated amnesia. Like when an event happens, they collectively intentionally forget. So now think about Black people as a whole. I'll give an example, Jen. In May of 2022, there was a recent situation, and I think we had a discussion about it, about the Buffalo shooter. Do you remember that story?
Yes, definitely.
Black folks already done forgot about it. Black folks done already forgot that in May of this year,
Mm.
a Caucasian male who had ties to white supremacy and government agencies, because he had a Twitch page where former government agents were watching what he was doing and didn't stop it. He walked into a store, shot down multiple people. Now, the white dude that he shot, he said, "Oh, sorry, bro." But in the video, when you see it, he shoots a black man. Not only does he shoot a black man, he reloads his weapon and discharges his firearm again. So the white dude he shoots, he says, "Sorry, bro," but the black dude he reloads and shoots him again to confirm the ethnic cleansing that he was doing. That type of traumatic event, it should already be in our consciousness to say, look, we're dealing with a bully. We need to either fight this bully or escape from this bully, right? But Black folks already done forgot. July came. Oh, let's celebrate 4th of July. Let's celebrate independence. 1776, you were still in slavery, fam. Oh, we got new
Mm.
holidays coming up. We got Labor Day coming up. We got Halloween coming up in October. We got Thanksgiving Day. They're preparing for future events and holidays associated with the same group of folks that don't like us. So this is what she's going into as the effects and symptoms of those that suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, but multiply that when it comes to us as a nation of people. There's a dissociative amnesia, not due to any head injury or alcohol or drugs, but we collectively force ourselves to forget events happening to us so that way we could push back the trauma, push back the hurt, and keep pushing. We have this kind of, I got to survive, I got to keep pushing, I can't let this bring me down, which is good to a certain extent, but also bad in a sense of you're not directly dealing with the issue at hand. Okay, so there's more on that, but I didn't want to get too long-winded. Those are just examples of trauma that she describes when it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder, and we can literally look at these things in Black people. For example, self-destructive behavior, right, with gang violence, with domestic situations happening between spouses, right, reckless behavior such as hypersexuality. Look at the entertainment industry, right? They push hypersexuality, they push extreme violence, gang lifestyle, and people think that's part of our culture. No. Prior to rap music, we had lawyers, doctors, musicians, artisans that were pushing culture and art, jazz, R&B, country,
Mhm.
rock music. All these different things that are prominent in America came from Black people. Not to mention all the vast amounts of inventions that we've created. Our culture is not destructive behavior. So we have extreme startle response, we have problems in concentration, sleep disturbances. All these things are examples of post-traumatic stress disorder that affect common day Black folks now to this day. So I just want to kind of mention that so that way we could get an indication of, hey, what's going on to the people and how they're impacted by this. And it's a real deal situation
Oh,
with no
definitely.
therapy.
Definitely. Share with us some, I guess, additional solutions as we wrap up our discussion here.
Okay, so solutions. You got two ways to deal with a bully. You either punch the bully in the face and deal with it directly, meaning fight, or you run away from the bully. You get away from the bully. Those are two ways that you can deal with it. But the bully is still going to be there regardless of what you do. Inaction is not the way to go. So
Mhm.
now I've been telling black folks, look, just get up out of America. There are vast other countries that are out here. There are many black people that are expatriating to other places. There are
Mhm.
many black people that are traveling, that are visiting places like the Caribbean islands. Believe it or not, there were more black people that were enslaved in Latin America and other areas of the world as opposed to the United States of America. There's black people everywhere. So
That's
you
true.
don't have to stay in a place where someone is actively, physically, mentally abusing you openly. You don't got to stay here. Oh, you trying to tell me to leave America? Yes, leave. For what? You have no reason to stay. You listen. There's so many ways to make money. You can make money online. You can make money through business ventures. You can do entrepreneurship. You have to reach out to the black diaspora in different areas and make moves. I just saw a video where this African American dude, I'm not going to give his
Mhm.
full name, but his last name is Muhammad or something like that. He set up a business in Haiti. I think
Mhm.
I'll give his name. His name is Tariq Muhammad. He I saw a video with him on YouTube where he has a business called Buzz, where he created a call center and he outsourced the call center in places like Haiti, in places like Jamaica, in places like the Philippines. So he's he's doing something, creating generational wealth for himself and helping the people of the land.
Mhm.
And that's a solution of what we can do to get ourselves out of the mindset. There's some people that have not even traveled outside of their state or their region, let alone outside of the country. We got to stop pigeonholing ourselves to think that the United States of America is the best place on the planet. Look at Jackson, Mississippi. In
Oh
Jackson,
man.
Mississippi, right now, folks is pouring water down the sink, and the water look like doodle juice. The water looks
Yeah.
like straight doodle coming out of the faucet. It's brown and green and all of this in a quote unquote first world country. Okay. In a first world country now, in the greatest nation, make America great again. In the greatest nation on earth, you got doodle water. Come on now. But then the same president that's running the place will call other places ish hole country, right? You can't
Right.
make this up. You can't make this up. You call other nations ish hole country, but doodle water coming out of your own pipes. Get out of here. So solutions, the Bible tells us what to do. In the book of Zephaniah, chapter 2, verse 1, it says this. Watch this. It says, gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired. We as a nation of people have to understand the importance of unity. We can't separate ourselves and say, oh, I'm FBA, oh, I'm ADOS, oh, I'm African immigrant, oh, I'm Afro Caribbean, oh, I'm Haitian, I'm Jamaican, I'm Puerto Rican. No, we all black folks. We all the same. We have a collective history, a collective unity that we can look to say, hey, I can relate to you in this part. Let's work together. Put away religious differences, put away political differences, put away all these ideologies that we learned in America and work as a collective. As the only I think the only way we can unite is if our mind is changed, our religious perspective, where we stop viewing these individuals that abuse us as God. Jesus
Mhm.
Christ is a black man, y'all. I'm gonna keep it 100 with you. When you have that thought process that you're the son of God, that Jesus looks like you, that God looks like you, You're not going to see yourself as a quote unquote Negro. You're going to say, I'm not a Negro. I'm God's chosen people. That's going to stop black on black crime. That's going to stop women trying to bleach their hair and blonde their eyes. That's going to stop people go in places like Ghana, Nigeria, Jamaica, where they're getting bleaching creams. These are all solutions. Your image has to be restored. Your mind has to be restored. So once you remove European domination out of your brain, you're going to realize that this Bible is talking about you. You're going to start doing what? Returning back to the ways of your ancestors, keeping the commandments of God, holding yourself up as royalty. That's a legitimate solution to post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. I also want to share, because this was mentioned in the book by the author about therapy and as a way of people who need to seek medical or mental health assistance, because this mental health is a real thing, and a lot of people do need to you know take care of their mental health with therapy and things like that. And she mentions that a lot of African Americans are often suspicious and leery of the care that they'll receive. And part of the reason why they have that suspicion is because the way we have been treated in the past, which is another pull to that post-traumatic slave syndrome, because black people have been used as test subjects. We can go on and on about that.
What exactly? I
I
got
know
a
you.
brother I talked to about that, Jen.
Hmm.
He was like, man, I tried therapy. I said, what did you do? He said, man, I sat on the white man dirty couch. I talked about my problems, and then he gave me a pill. That pill almost made me suicidal, man. I said, what? He's like, yeah, man, that thing, I took that pill. That medication ain't do nothing for me. It made me numb. It made me dull. Listen, I'm going to tell you the therapy. I'm going to tell you the real deal therapy. Spiritual, spiritual therapy. Crack open that book that got dust on it that you call the Bible. It's a black history book. Read the book throughout. Seek the Most High. I know a guy specifically who had 3 days of insanity, hallucinations, suicide ideation. This dude was messed up, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep for 3 days.
I mean, we don't want to put
He
that out
was,
there as the only representation of therapy. So,
no
I mean,
worries. I just want to give you just an anecdotal
no, I
situation
hear
to
you.
kind of help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's some people
So
really struggling out there, and therapy has saved their life. So I definitely don't want to
I agree.
diminish
I agree.
diminish therapy.
I'm just giving an anecdotal situation of a person that I encountered in
Okay,
regards to therapy. I'm not saying that therapy is bad. No. You
right.
have to start on self-actualization. You have to seek help in some way, shape, or form. I'm not negating that. I'm just giving an
Mhm.
anecdotal situation of what a brother that I witnessed myself, how he alleviated the insanity that he was suffering from. So
Mm,
this young man was having hallucinations. He was having different thought processes that were negative, of course. And he sat down and he read the Bible straight through, the Old Testament from Genesis to I think like the book of Haggai or something like that. And his symptoms dissipated over that 3 to 4 week time period of him reading, and he was doing journaling as well. That's part of therapy, of what they tell you, write down your problems. So what he was doing was reading the Bible, he was journaling, he was kind of having that prayer meditation moment, quieting his spirit, and that helped him. So I want to kind of give that in conjunction to therapy, what people could do, because it's a spiritual thing as
mhm.
well as a psychological thing. That's the point I was making with that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Definitely. Yeah, there are definitely many resources, everyone, if you need, to reach out for that type of assistance. So I definitely want to share that point, please tell us. Such a hearty discussion and so many points, but I think we covered the majority. Guys, we definitely recommend you picking up the book. I got mine on Amazon, and it's actually published back in 2005. But even being that old, it just really has really fresh information that you really can just relate to what's going on right now, looking at the news, reading the newspaper. So, yeah, I definitely recommend getting the book as we are in book discussion mode and concluding. Any, I guess, last thoughts on the book, and then you can let us know how people can find your podcast.
Last thoughts on the book. It is a very insightful book to read on the symptoms of what we face as a nation of people. And a lot of times we don't like to take a critical look at our life experience and find ways to positively impact us and create substantial change. So I would definitely recommend this book to those that are critical thinkers in many different circles to just look at it and come up with solutions on how we could better ourselves. So I'm Levi. I'm the host of the Forefront Radio. Of course, you can find the Forefront Radio on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anchor.fm/the forefront. I have a YouTube page. Just type the Forefront Radio 1 and you'll be able to find the YouTube page. A quick plug, we are part of the Content Creators of Color, and we have a new series, a new season rather, starting in the month of October. So please join us on Content Creators of Color, hashtag C4 Challenge, where we have many different people from our community coming up with various stories. I have a series that I'm working on right now that's going to drop on there called Legacy of the Wicked. Man, oh man, y'all got to listen to that thing.
Okay.
Y'all gotta listen to that thing because when you hear it, you're gonna be like, "That's true, that's true, that's true." Oh man, hitting the nail on the head. All right, so it's an exciting series that I'm still currently working on, but I already started sprinkling out a couple of episodes here and there, and the full series is going to be on the Content Creators of Color for the month of October. And if you
Great.
want to hit me up on social media, Instagram is the Forefront Express. On Facebook, it's the Forefront Media, and my email address is the Forefront, the four without the E, the four FOR front black media at gmail.com. Appreciate the love, Jen, as always.
Definitely. And we'll have those links posted, guys. We appreciate you so much for tuning in and listening. Please take care.